World leaders have gathered in Davos to talk economics, but President Trump, well, he apparently had other plans. The topic of Greenland is now front and center, sucking all the oxygen out of the room, as Trump ramps up pressure on U.S. allies, continuing his bid to acquire the world's largest island. Seriously, not since Eric the Red has there been this much buzz about Greenland. Coming up next, why Greenland matters and what this push may really be about. World leaders are gathering in Davos this week. It's a gathering of the swells for the annual World Economic Forum. And no, this year's headline topic is not global growth or artificial intelligence or trade deals. It's Greenland. If you didn't have that on your 2026 bingo card, well, you are absolutely forgiven. Much like picking Indiana to win the college football championships this year, I did not identify Greenland as the issue that could threaten relations between the U.S. and NATO and the European Union. But here we are. As presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, and plenty of posh folks arrive in the Swiss Alps, President Trump has launched what can only be described as a full-court press on Greenland, turning a long-simmering idea into a very public, very pointed campaign. Over the past several days, the president has escalated his rhetoric, arguing that the U.S. is the only country capable of ensuring stability and security in Greenland. Those comments have prompted some fairly terse responses from European officials and added fuel to an already tense diplomatic exchange. As we've previously reported, the president has paired his messaging with tariff threats in response to European nations announcing small troop deployments onto the island. When I say small, I mean less than a couple dozen. And as world leaders convene in Davos, Greenland has suddenly become a centerpiece of side conversations and private meetings and diplomatic maneuvering. They do a lot of that at Davos. No doubt, this kerfuffle is making the 56,000 residents of Greenland feel rather special. The last time much of the world was talking about Greenland was, probably when Eric the Red landed on the island over 1,000 years ago and decided it would be a fairly swell place for a Norse settlement. Ahead of his arrival in Switzerland, President Trump said he had agreed to a meeting focused on Greenland, following what he described as a, quote, very good call with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. And just before boarding his plane, the president summed it up this way. It is going to be a very interesting Davos. That's what he said. That's how he summed it up. Now, let's talk about the substance behind all of this, such as it is. To date, the president's core argument for American ownership of Greenland has centered on national security. And on that front, well, there is a serious case to be made that Greenland matters a great deal to U.S. strategic interests. Greenland occupies a critical position in the Arctic, sitting astride the shortest flight paths between North America and Europe. That geography makes it a key vantage point for monitoring potential missile, bomber, and even hypersonic threats originating from, let's say Russia. It's not theoretical. Those routes do matter. The U.S. already operates Bidufik Space Base. That's what it's called, Bidufik. It's formerly known as Thule Air Base, which was a lot easier to say, which hosts advanced early warning radar systems essential for detecting ballistic missile launches and tracking activity in space over the Arctic. That facility is a quiet but vital piece of America's homeland defense architecture. Greenland also plays an increasing role in the protection of emerging Arctic sea lanes. As ice recedes, new shipping routes are opening that could dramatically shorten transit between Asia, Europe, and North America. Those same routes could also be exploited by adversarial navies, making monitoring and access even more important. And finally, from a broader alliance perspective, Greenland strengthens NATO's northern flank, complementing U.S. and allied forces in places like Iceland, Norway, and Canada, at a time when Russia continues expanding its Arctic military footprint. But here's where things get more complicated. The president has begun to undercut that national security case or argument by making the issue personal. According to reporting, in a text message sent on January 18th to Norway's Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, President Trump wrote, quote, "Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America." End quote. In plain English, that comes across like, this is what happens when I don't get my trophy. It's not a good look. There's another issue that complicates the argument even further. The U.S. already enjoys extensive access to Greenland under existing agreements. Yes, we have existing agreements in place. Under the 1951 U.S.-Denmark Defense Agreement, it's a Cold War-era deal that remains in force, the U.S. has broad rights to operate, maintain, and expand military facilities in Greenland. That agreement is the backbone of America's Arctic security presence. It's what allows the U.S. to operate Beidoufique space base today. See, I pronounced it correctly again, Beidoufique. I just can't stop saying it. It grants wide latitude to move personnel, aircraft, and equipment in and out of Greenland, and to build or upgrade infrastructure as defense needs require. Denmark must be consulted, but it does not exercise routine obstruction. Because Denmark is a NATO member, U.S. operations in Greenland are embedded within the alliance framework. Functionally speaking, Greenland already operates as part of NATO's Northern Defensive Shield. In other words, the U.S. already has most of the access it needs without owning the island. What's more, the U.S. military footprint in Greenland has shrunk dramatically since the Cold War. Today, here it comes again, Beidoufique Space Base is the only permanent U.S. installation on the island. As of 2025 and 2026 now, it hosts roughly 150 to 200 U.S. personnel, focused mostly on missile warning and space surveillance missions. That's a fraction of past levels. During the Cold War, the U.S. operated dozens of facilities across Greenland, with thousands of troops stationed there, more than 6,000 at Beidoufique alone at its peak, and over 10,000 across all installations. If Washington wanted to expand its presence today, it could do so substantially under the existing framework. Which brings us to the real question. Is this, you ask, about legitimate concern over America's long-term interests in the Arctic, or is Greenland being cast as something else entirely? A geopolitical trophy, a symbol, or a legacy play aimed at territorial expansion on a scale not seen since the era of President McKinley, and we all remember him. Regardless, the issue unnecessarily is sucking the oxygen out of the room. For the Republicans, at a time when they need to worry about losing their very slim majority in Congress during the upcoming midterm elections, Greenland is a distraction. And, much like the protests and anger over ICE operations in Minnesota and elsewhere, it comes across as chaos to the average American voter. All right, coming up next, shocking new numbers out of China, where Communist Party enforcers reportedly punished nearly 1 million people in 2025 as President Xi Jinping tightens his grip. Plus, a major escalation across the Taiwan Strait as Beijing violates Taiwan's airspace with a military drone. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Well, it is 2026. I'm sure you've already guessed that. So did you make any New Year's resolutions? I can tell you I did. I made a few, including, and this is an important one, to get better sleep every night, right? Sleep is basically the foundation, of course, for the rest of your day. With a good night's sleep, you have more energy, you handle stress better, and you think more clearly. It's a very good resolution. And to help make it a reality, I turned to CBD products from CB Distillery. They're sleep gummies with a combination of CBD and melatonin really do the trick. Seriously, you'll wake up refreshed and ready to take on whatever the day brings. Look, over 90% of CBD customers say they sleep better with CBD. And CB Distillery has options for more than just sleep. They've got solutions for stress, mood, and pain after workouts. That's important. Everything from CB Distillery is premium quality, third-party tested, and free of artificial dyes and fillers. They've got over 2 million happy customers, 2 million of them, and a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're ready to start the year off right, go to cbdistillery.com and use the code PDB for 25% off. That's cbdistillery.com, code PDB, cbdistillery.com. Specific product availability depends on individual state regulations. Welcome back to the PDB. After driving internal purges to historic levels, Chinese President Xi Jinping is demanding more. With nearly 1 million people punished last year, according to CCP sources, that's from the CCP, the Communist Party is being told to further tighten discipline as Beijing prepares its next 5-year economic plan. That directive came with explicit instructions. Speaking at a conclave of the CCP's top internal watchdog, and when was the last time you heard somebody use the word conclave, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, or CCDI, because they also love acronyms over there with the Communist Party, she told inspectors to expand their supervisory reach and make sure his agenda is carried out without deviation. Xi framed the push, as he often does, as a fight against corruption. He called corruption a, quote, major obstacle to the party and the nation, and urged inspectors to enforce top leadership decisions, quote, more resolutely. But the timing tells you what this push is really about. This is happening as Beijing gears up for a new 5-year economic plan, which dictates the country's economic and industrial direction. Once finalized, local officials are expected to fall in line with the plan's enforcement, making this a moment when Xi is moving to eliminate any space for dissent. Party authorities say they disciplined a record 983,000 people in 2025, using punishments that range from reprimands and demotions to expulsions. Now, that's nearly an 11% increase from what was already a record year in 2024, and the highest annual total since the party began publishing figures 2 decades ago. You got to love a Communist Party that annually publishes a record of how many people they've punished and disciplined. State media quickly moved to reinforce Xi's message. In a front-page commentary, the party's flagship newspaper said central directives are still being undermined by hesitant or misguided local officials. Some regions, it warned, are blindly chasing industries promoted by Beijing, like semiconductors or electric vehicles or lithium batteries, even when local conditions make those projects impractical to pursue. State media cautioned that when policies are implemented in ways quoted as detached from reality, it's easy for things to become distorted and good scripture to become twisted, end quote. The solution, according to the party line, is stricter discipline. In other words, when policy fails, the answer is enforcement. But even the Communist Party admits that years of relentless purges have chilled initiative across China's bureaucracy, leaving many local officials reluctant to even act at all. That process comes at a particularly bad time, as local governments struggle with already slowing growth and heavy debt. Xi has tried to address that contradiction by telling officials that honest mistakes can be tolerated and that discipline shouldn't extinguish willingness to act. But between January and November of last year, over 140,000 people were punished for offenses tied exclusively to policy inaction or deceit. That number surpasses the 138,000 cases recorded in all of 2024. So, this is where it becomes clear that the campaign is no longer just about corruption. Since Xi launched it after taking power in 2012, the drive has evolved into a permanent enforcement mechanism designed to compel loyalty to his leadership. Authorities say more than 7 million people have been punished over the past decade. They have been busy. And the purge has even begun to turn inward on the enforcement machinery itself. The mob always eats its own. Only 120 members, which is about 90% of those originally appointed, attended the CCDI conclave that ended this week, marking the lowest participation rate since 1986, leading to assumptions that their absence points to Xi's purge. Still, Xi closed the conclave with a warning that underscored the coercive nature of his campaign. Quote, "We must unswervingly maintain a high-pressure posture," vowing that corruption, graft, and what he labeled evil would be eradicated so targeted officials have, quote, "no place to hide." Okay, I want to turn to Taiwan, where we've seen China probe the democratic island's defenses repeatedly. But over the weekend, Beijing escalated that pressure and for the first time sent a military drone into Taiwanese-controlled airspace. Here's how it unfolded. Taiwan's defense ministry says a Chinese surveillance drone slipped into the airspace over Pratas Island and remained there for about 4 minutes. Now, Pratas, which is also known in China as Dongsha, is a Taiwan-controlled atoll in the South China Sea. And this is where China's intent becomes clear. A Taiwanese national security official identified the aircraft as a Beijing Soaring Dragon, a high-altitude military surveillance drone. According to Taiwan's defense ministry, it was flying above the range of Taipei's air defense systems. In practical terms, that meant that Taipei could broadcast warnings over radio and television channels, but it couldn't shoot the drone down, even if it wanted to. That constraint is not accidental. It's Beijing testing the island's defense reaction. An associate director at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub, which is a research center focused on countering challenges posed by Beijing, said, quote, China has found another soft spot. They can repeat this to demonstrate that they can enter Taiwan airspace with impunity. The concern now is that Beijing could gradually fly lower and lower, putting Taiwan in a bind. If Taipei eventually does shoot down a drone, China could then accuse the island of escalating the situation, creating a narrative that it could use to justify an invasion. As we've discussed here on the PDB, Beijing claims Taiwan as its territory, of course, and has repeatedly threatened to annex the island by force if Taipei refuses to submit to its control. PDB regular listeners know that China's People's Liberation Army, the PLA, has repeatedly paired large-scale military exercises with frequent air and naval patrols around Taiwan, operations that have steadily encroached closer and closer to Taiwan. And PRATOS has become a particular focus of that pressure. Over the past year, Chinese Coast Guard ships and their maritime militia, consisting of fishing vessels used for paramilitary missions, have consistently harassed the atoll. Earlier this month, Taiwan's Coast Guard released footage showing 2 Chinese Coast Guard vessels approaching the island. Taipei describes it as a sustained effort to normalize a Chinese presence around Taiwan's outlying territories without firing a single shot. The geography helps explain why Beijing keeps returning there. PRATOS sits roughly 260 miles south of Taiwan's main island, positioned along sea lanes linking the Taiwan Strait and the Bashi Channel. Notably, those routes would be critical to U.S. and Chinese submarine movements in any future conflict. So, control of the atoll would give China leverage over one of the region's most sensitive corridors and a strategic foothold just short of Taiwan itself. That creates a dilemma, not just for Taipei, but for Washington as well. Taiwanese officials believe the U.S. would likely assist in defending the island in the event of a Chinese invasion, but PRATOS occupies a grayer space. The atoll lies within overlapping territorial claims in the South China Sea, inherited from the Republic of China, complicating assumptions, of course, about whether the U.S. would intervene militarily if China moved to seize PRATOS. The ambiguity surrounding the atoll has sharpened concerns in Taipei, where officials worry Beijing could exploit that uncertainty to notch a psychological win without triggering a war. Of course, Beijing dismissed Taiwan's concern. The PLA's Southern Theater Command said the drone was part of what it called, quote, normal training around China's Dongsha Island, insisting that the operation was, quote, completely legitimate and lawful, end quote. All right, coming up in today's Back of the Brief, London clears the way for a massive Chinese embassy, prioritizing diplomacy with Beijing over security concerns. Well, I'm sure that's going to go well. We'll have those details. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now, you may know me as the host of the PDB, and I hope you do, but I am also a longtime business owner. And as a business owner, I am always focused on maintaining great client relationships and working to develop new clients. That's why I want to talk to you about a terrific company out there called Quo. It's spelled Q-U-O, Quo. Now, any of you in business know this, right? Smooth, efficient communications is a key to success. You can't afford to miss a call or a message because a missed customer interaction, well, that's probably revenue walking right out the door. And that's why today's episode is sponsored by Quo, the modern and effective way to run your business communications. Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by 90,000 businesses because it's built for modern teams. One shared number for calls and texts, conversation history, and smart AI that summarizes calls and highlights next steps, even after hours, and when you're probably busy catching up on episodes of our PDB Situation Report, or whatever you do after hours. It works seamlessly on your phone and computer, keeps your existing number, and it scales as you grow. Make this the year where no opportunity and no potential customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/PDB. That's Quo, Q-U-O. Go to quo.com/PDB. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. In today's Back of the Brief, the United Kingdom has given China the green light to build what would become its largest embassy in Europe, right in the heart of London. This new diplomatic complex would dwarf China's current mission and be significantly larger than even the U.S. embassy in the city. The decision comes despite loud warnings from British lawmakers, U.S. officials, and security hawks who argue the site could serve as a hub for Chinese espionage and influence operations. The UK's own intelligence services have repeatedly warned that China represents one of the most persistent long-term security challenges facing the country. So, you ask, why approve it? Well, according to the British government, security agencies were consulted throughout the review process and concluded that any intelligence risks could be managed and mitigated. Of course they can be. Officials argue that rejecting the project outright would have damaged already fragile relations with Beijing and potentially carried economic consequences, there you have the reason, at a time when London is eager to stabilize trade and investment ties. The approval comes just ahead of Prime Minister Keir Starmer's expected visit to China, his first since 2018. From Beijing's perspective, the embassy project is more than a building. It's a symbol of status, legitimacy, and access. From London's perspective, it appears to be a calculated signal. We can compete with China strategically while still doing business diplomatically. And critics, though, aren't buying it. Opposition lawmakers and local residents argue the government rushed the decision and ignored legitimate concerns about surveillance, proximity to sensitive infrastructure, and the sheer scale of the facility. Some are already threatening legal challenges, claiming the approval process was effectively decided before public objections were fully considered. There's also the alliance question. Britain is a core member of the Five Eyes intelligence network alongside the U.S. and Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Washington has made no secret of its unease about China's global diplomatic expansion, particularly when it involves oversized embassies that could support intelligence collection far beyond traditional diplomatic and intel activity. And when I say could support, I mean it will support. Now, this story fits a broader pattern. China continues to press for a larger physical and political footprint in Western capitals, while governments, especially in Europe, try to balance security concerns against economic realities. London's decision suggests that, at least for now, diplomacy and trade are winning out over caution and security. But this issue isn't totally settled. Legal challenges, political backlash, and allied pressure could still complicate the project. And if tensions with China worsen, as they have repeatedly over espionage, cyber activity, and coercive diplomacy, well, this embassy project could be stalled yet again. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Wednesday, the 21st of January. Now, if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And, of course, as you've probably read in the celebrity columns and magazines, our YouTube channel has become quite the thing. You can find it on YouTube, of course. Just search for @President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, Mike Baker here. Let me take just a moment of your time to talk about personal finances and financial goals, right? Very important stuff as we move into 2026. Look, if you're a homeowner, there is no better time than now to call American Financing and wipe out that debt that's had you worried, right? Here's the thing. Look, the Fed dropped rates for the fourth time in December, and American Financing can now help you access the equity in your home at an interest rate in the low fives. Listen to that. That is much lower and much more attractive, might I add, than the average 20% or more charged by credit cards. American Financing is saving their customers an average of $800 a month. Now, that's something like a $10,000 raise to start the new year. There are no upfront fees, that's very important, and there's no obligation just to see how much you can save. And some folks, by the way, are even delaying 2 mortgage payments. American Financing is America's home for home loans. Call today, 866-885-1881. That number again, 866-885-1881. Or just visit americanfinancing.net/PDB. Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.